immersion is so important, right? The first bit that you do in any act of diplomacy, in any act of conflict resolution at an international level, is a recognition that those individuals who are going to serve as intermediaries between parties had better have a sense of what it is to live in that culture. Dude, before you actually do your job, I want you to be boots on the ground, 3 months, get to know the people, go to the movies, get something to eat, here's a stipend, make sure, live it up, have fun. Go to church, go to mosque, go to synagogue, eat the food, do what you need to do. Listen to the music, dance, wear the traditional clothing, get to know what it's like. If the individual is capable and willing to do that, you already know they're a sophist, right? If they're like, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do, well, they're tied to something. And that being tied to something is an ideological and eventual physical weakness. It weakens their stance, right? You're in a weaker position because you refuse to immerse yourself. Cultural immersion is the enticement for the sophist. The sophist is enticed out by that sense of cultural immersion. Big shout out to Moses McCormick. Moses McCormick, he's a guru. You know, young dude speaks 40 freaking languages. The guy's he's insane. Not just because he speaks all the languages. Think about how culturally sensitive that guy is. Think about how much of a sophist that guy is. Think about how much, I don't think Moses understands how much power he has. I think he knows, but he couldn't know. Because I couldn't be him. It would be bad to have me have that ability of speaking 40 languages. It would just be, I would just whore myself to the institution. It would be beautiful. I'm already whoring myself to the institution, but it would be bad. Right? The idea is immerse yourself, right? Cultural immersion allows the sophist to recognize just how insignificant it is to attach yourself to any one stance. Thus, who better to be an immoralist? That's what the immoralist is. The immoralist is free of moral attachment. Now, granted, I know enough of ethical theory to understand that there's a distinction between immoralism and amoralism. I'm not getting into that discussion now. We're talking about Nietzsche. Nietzsche uses the word immoral. But he means immoral in the sense of, this doesn't concern morality. This is not about morality. Because morality isn't in a position to judge me. Because I'm culturally immersed. I'm flexible. I'm a sophist. Okay, now, with all the good recommendations and commendations and all the glowing accolade that I can say for Nietzsche, every time I find in the text, because you guys know, I've read this text very methodically in order to be able to present it as methodically as I'm presenting it. Every time he says some racist stuff, I call him out on it. So, at the end of note 429, the racism pops up, and we need to denounce the racism. So here's what he says. He goes, when Socrates and Plato took up the cause of virtue and justice, they were Jews, or I know not what. First of all, what does that mean? Well, we see now that, he's thinking that Plato really is the opiate of the masses, right? Not religion. Plato is the opiate of the masses. Because if religion is the opiate of the masses, and Plato informed religion, then really the saying should be Plato is the opiate of the masses, right? So Plato is the opiate of the masses. And he believes that Plato dropped the ball, that he lost the Hellenic connection, the sophistic connection to really this world. He gave up this world for the other world, at least within his text. Whether he did personally is irrelevant. So he gave up this world for the world of the forms. So when he evokes Plato, and he says, well, when Socrates and Plato took up the cause of virtue, they did so, they were Jews, they did it as Jews, he's saying, you were slavish. Plato and Socrates were slavish, like the Jews were, right? They were weak, like the Jews were, right? That's just not cool, right? That's not cool. So, Nietzsche, bold-faced racism, no question about it. Again, however, I've pointed to passages earlier where when he talks about suffering And when he talks about punishment, he doesn't mean it in the sense, and I've justified this before, I've also justified where he denounces sort of fatherlandism. So Nietzsche is a human being. He's not necessarily going to be totally consistent. There will be parts of his discourse that are contradictory, maybe even confusing, sure. And I've read his stuff enough to know both stances. Again, is this comment acceptable? Absolutely not. It's not acceptable. Does that mean then that we can't read Nietzsche and we can't incorporate Nietzsche's ideas for social betterment, for social empowerment of precisely the people that he was being so mean-spirited in this section? Of course not. You can incorporate them. You don't have to get rid of all of it. But again, I do this because I have a sense of responsibility, not to just present the glowing accolades and the finer points of Nietzsche, but also to present the sort of gritty side. But again, small passage, everything else is epic. Number 8. This is a long lecture. Number 8. The great concepts, good and just, are severed from presuppositions to which they belong. The great concept, justice, good and just, are severed from the presuppositions rather, which they belong. This is a very difficult passage to make sense of, so I'm gonna draw this picture so that you can have an understanding of how this looks. So we have the level of the forms here for Plato, and we have the good as form, and we have the just as form. Okay. Now, we have the presupposition. We have a huge line of demarcation, right? Separating the upper half from the lower half. I'll talk about that in a second. And then we have the world of existence. Okay, so the world of existence, the world of the forms. Nietzsche says there's a presupposition that no one's actually addressing. So, the great concept, good and just, are severed from the presuppositions to which they belong, as liberated ideas become objects of dialectic. What in the world does that mean? What Plato does is he abstracts the idea of good and just and conceptualizes a space in which these perfect concepts exist. Insofar as he conceptualizes a space in which these perfect concepts exist, what immediately is presupposed are bodies to fill that space as well. So that there is a sense in which both the physical body and the concepts as such commingle. In order to commingle with good as such, with just as such, the body occupying that realm, that space, would have to be the best. Not just good, but the best, the most just. Right? So then we posit this perverted existence in which the body is as good as. Right? This becomes problematic, right? This becomes problematic because you couple this idea in Plato with Darwinism, and you get social Darwinism on crack, and you get a philosophical justification for social Darwinism, right? Because there is a sense in which you can philosophically justify, as a good immoralist sophist is, social Darwinism, and insofar as you can philosophically justify social Darwinism, it sounds something like this. There is a sense in which when we talk about the survival of the fittest, those individuals who are best apt to survive do, those individuals who are not best apt don't, those who are best apt go on to produce offspring that are as good as, or if not better, which in theory could lead us to a point in time where we have the best possible conceivable adaptation of the human